The hours between. The storm had been forecast for 2 days, the outer bands of a typhoon crawling up from the Pacific to drown Kanto in rain, but no one had predicted it would take out the block's transformer station. One moment, the suite was lit by the cold blue of 4 monitors and the warmer amber of a desk lamp. The next, everything went out at once, so completely that for a full second neither of them moved, as if sound itself had gone with the light. Huh, light said into the dark, and even that single syllable felt strangely loud. Across the room, a chair creaked, L shifting his weight, knees still drawn to his chest, even in blackness, as though the dark hadn't changed anything about how he chose to sit in a room. The building has a backup generator, he said, his voice its usual flat register, betraying nothing. It should engage within 90 seconds. It didn't. A minute passed, then 2, then 5, marked only by the tick of Light's watch, and the rain hammering the windows like something trying to get in. Somewhere below them a battery-backed alarm chirped twice, and died. When Light's eyes adjusted, he could make out L's silhouette against the gray wash of stormlight from the window, hunched, still, watching him back. 90 seconds? Light said, dry. I may have been optimistic. Light found his phone. No signal. The storm had taken the cell towers along with everything else, or else simply overwhelmed them. Half the ward reaching for their phones at once. He said as much, and heard L check his own, the small blue glow of the screen throwing his face into sharp relief for a moment before he set it down. The landline in the hall might still function, L said. Copper lines aren't dependent on grid power. It didn't. Light held the receiver to his ear in the dark hallway, and heard nothing. Not even a dial tone. Just the particular silence of a line that has decided not to participate. When he came back into the suite, he found L exactly where he'd left him, folded into the armchair, and understood without being told that they were going to be here for a while. There was, it turned out, a battery lamp in the emergency supply closet, the kind hotels kept for exactly this occasion, dust on its casing, a wan LED bulb that gave off a light more gray than white. L set it on the low table between them. It was not bright enough to read by, not really. It was bright enough to see a face by if the face was close. The laptops have perhaps 40 minutes of charge remaining, L said, folding himself back into the chair, thumb drifting to the corner of his mouth. Insufficient to accomplish anything useful before they, too, are dark. The files on Higuchi's shell corporations exist only on the secured servers 2 floors down, which are, of course, also without power. I don't believe there is meaningful investigative work to be done tonight, Light Kun. So we wait. A pause, considering. Several hours. At minimum. The utility company's estimate for the ward was 6 hours before the storm made landfall. It has since gotten worse. Light let that sit, folding his hands in his lap in the lamp's small circle of light, and thought, fine. He'd spent months learning to be watched. He could spend a few hours being watched in the dark instead of the light. If anything, it should be easier. Harder for L to catch the flicker of something behind his eyes if there was less light to catch it in. He was wrong about that, as it turned out, but it took him a while to understand why. You don't seem bothered, L said, some minutes into the silence, by the prospect of being trapped in a room with the person who suspects you of mass murder. Should I be? Light let a small, easy smile into his voice, the kind he'd practiced since he was young enough to know a smile was a kind of currency. If I were Kira, Ryuzuki, I don't think a blackout would be much of a threat to me, and if I'm not, then I'm just trapped in a hotel room with an eccentric detective during a typhoon. Slightly inconvenient, not exactly a crisis. An interesting distinction. You've placed the danger entirely on my side of the equation, isn't it? You're the one who thinks you're alone in a dark room with a killer. I never said I thought that. You didn't have to. Light shifted, letting his knee brush the low table, watching L's eyes flick to the movement and back. Cataloging. Always cataloging. You've had cameras on me for months. You've had someone read my mail. I'd be a fairly poor student of you, Ryuzuki, if I hadn't noticed the pattern by now. And yet you're still here, voluntarily, working alongside the person surveilling you. L tilted his head, the lamp catching the hollows under his eyes. That's either the behavior of an innocent man with nothing to hide, or the behavior of a man who has calculated that leaving would look worse than staying. Or, Light said, it's the behavior of someone who wants to catch Kira, and thinks you're the best chance of doing it, and who has decided that being suspected is an acceptable cost of being useful. He let the smile thin, just slightly, into something more tired. You'd be surprised how quickly a person stops being offended by an accusation once they've heard it enough times, Ryuzuki. Now it's just Tuesday. It wasn't quite true. No accusation that large ever really stopped landing. But it was true enough to say convincingly, and he watched Elle absorb it the way Elle absorbed everything, without any visible reaction at all. Filed somewhere behind those flat dark eyes for later use. That's a very reasonable answer, Elle said. Was it supposed to be unreasonable? It was supposed to be revealing. Most people, told for months that they're suspected of thousands of murders, do not reach a state of philosophical calm about it. They become angry or frightened, or they overcompensate with cheerfulness designed to prove innocence. You've done none of those things. You've simply adjusted, recalibrated your baseline to include being a suspect. The way one recalibrates to a new pair of glasses. He picked at the seam of his jeans with one finger. It's either the mark of an unusually resilient person, or it's the mark of someone who was never surprised by the accusation in the first place, because he always knew it was coming. The rain filled the space where Light didn't answer immediately. You think a lot about how I answer things, Light said finally. More than what I actually say. The content of what people say is trivially easy to control. The shape of it is much harder. Elle's eyes hadn't moved from him. You, for instance, are extremely good at content. Your words are always exactly calibrated, reasonable, likable, faintly self-deprecating in the ways that read as confidence rather than insecurity. It's the shape that occasionally slips. The half-second delay before you decide how warm a laugh should be. The way your sentences get shorter when you're actually angry, instead of longer. The way most people's do. Something in Light's chest went very still, and very cold. The way it did on the rare occasion someone got close enough to the truth to feel the heat of it. He kept his face perfectly, carefully neutral, and understood, with the clarity of a man watching a car begin to skid, that keeping it neutral was itself the mistake, that a normal person would look uncomfortable right now, would look insulted, and he was one beat behind the performance he needed to give. He recovered by the second beat. Mostly. That's a very thorough psychological profile for someone you've known for 4 months, Light said, and was almost pleased with how light he kept it, how the words came out amused instead of strangled. Do you do this to everyone you work with, or is it just me? Just you, Elle said, without any apparent awareness that this might have been a strange thing to admit. No one else in the investigation is a suspect. The lamp's light didn't reach the corners of the room, and outside the window the storm had settled into a steady, grinding rhythm, rain and wind and, somewhere far off, a siren that rose and fell, and didn't seem to be coming for them. Elle had gone quiet in the particular way that Light had learned meant he was rearranging pieces rather than resting. And Light let the silence stretch because silence too could be a kind of pressure, and he wanted to see what Elle would fill it with. What Elle filled it with was your mother must worry. Light's eyes came up. About the investigation, Elle clarified, unnecessarily. Watching him the whole time. Sachiko-san, your father works impossible hours chasing a killer who has murdered dozens of people on television, and now his son does as well. It occurs to me that if I am right about you, if you are Kira, your mother is going to lose her husband's respect, her son's freedom, and very possibly her son's life, all at once, and she doesn't know any of it is coming. She just knows her family works too much, and doesn't come home for dinner. A pause, precisely timed. Do you ever think about that? What it does to her if I'm right? For one full second, something in Light's face was not performing anything at all. It wasn't rage, exactly. Though rage was in it somewhere, it was closer to the particular, airless fury of watching someone reach into a room you'd locked, and touch the one thing in it you hadn't hadn't planned for, because it was never supposed to be a piece on the board. His jaw tightened, his hands, folded in his lap, closed slightly, knuckles paling. For that second his eyes weren't calculating anything. They were simply furious, in the plain, unmanaged way of a 20-year-old who has just been told calmly that his mother's future grief is a data point. Elle saw it. Of course he saw it. It was the entire point of the sentence. Thrown like a stone to see what moved under the water. Then it was gone. Folded back under. And Light exhaled through his nose in something that might, in poor light, have passed for mere weariness. That's a low thing to say to someone, Ryuzuki. His voice had dropped. Just slightly. Not louder, quieter. The register people use when they're too angry to raise their voice and know it. Whatever you think I am. She's not a variable. Everyone is a variable. Elle said, not unkindly, watching him with an attention that had sharpened rather than relaxed. That's rather the tragedy of investigations like this one. I don't enjoy saying it. I said it because your reaction is useful data, and because I find I would genuinely rather know now than later. A beat. For what it's worth, Light-kun. That was the first unrehearsed thing you've shown me since October. Maybe I'm just tired, Light said, and heard, distantly, how thin that sounded even as he said it, of being told my grief is a control condition. You didn't say you were grieving. You said she wasn't a variable. Elle's head tilted a fraction, a small mechanical motion, like a bird recalibrating its aim. Interesting, that those aren't the same sentence. Light didn't answer that. He was aware, acutely, coldly aware, in the part of his mind that never stopped running, even when the rest of him wanted to put a fist through the wall, that any answer he gave now would be read as data, that silence would be read as data, that even the quality of his silence, how long it lasted, whether his breathing changed, would be logged somewhere behind those flat eyes, and cross-referenced against everything Light had said for the last 4 months. He made himself breathe evenly. He made himself unclench his hands, one finger at a time, slowly enough that it looked unconscious rather than deliberate. It was, he thought, the closest anyone had come. Not to proof, to him. You're very quiet, Elle observed, some 10 or 15 seconds later, the lamp guttering slightly, its battery beginning its slow decline. I'm deciding whether you're trying to catch a killer, Light said, or just trying to see if you can hurt me. Because those aren't the same thing either, Ryuzuki, and I'd have thought the world's greatest detective would care about the difference. That, at least, landed somewhere. Elle was quiet for a moment, not defensive, not stung, but considering, in a way that made Light suspect, uncomfortably, that the question had actually mattered to him, that some private ledger had just had an entry added to it in a column Light couldn't see. A fair point, Elle said eventually. I'll allow that the two are not always distinguishable, even to me. It was Light's turn, and he took it. Do you have anyone, he asked, careful to keep the question light, conversational, the kind of thing you'd ask to pass time in a stalled elevator, who worries about you when you disappear into a case like this? Family, friends, anyone who knows where you actually are right now, tonight, instead of just a screen with a letter on it. No, Elle said, without any pause at all, which was itself informative, the fastest, flattest answer he'd given all night. The kind of answer that had been given so many times before it no longer required construction. There's Watery who manages logistics. No one else knows my location with any regularity. It isn't necessary to my work. That's not what I asked. I'm aware. Does anyone worry, Ryuzuki? Not manage. Worry. The lamp flickered, dimmed by half, then steadied. In the thinner light Elle's face looked, for a moment, younger than Light usually let himself think of it as being. All sharp angles and no padding. A face that had perhaps never been taught what to do when it wasn't working. I don't know, Elle said. It was, Light thought, the first sentence, all night that hadn't been built for anything. It had just fallen out, the way true things sometimes did when a person was tired enough, or dark enough, or had simply run out of better material. I've never asked. It seems an unproductive question to put to people. If the answer is no, it accomplishes nothing but confirming something I already suspect. If the answer is yes, I have no framework for what to do with that information, and I suspect I would handle it badly. A pause, longer than his usual pauses. I don't say that as a complaint, Light-kun, only as an answer to your question. You did ask for an honest one? I asked if anyone worried about you, not whether you'd know how to let them. Those may be the same problem in my case. Something about the way he said it, flat, unhurried, without any of the theatrical melancholy a lesser performer might have reached for, made it land harder than a more obviously sad sentence would have. Light found himself, for a moment, not thinking about what to say next, which was rare enough, that he noticed the absence of the thought before he noticed the silence it left behind. You could have deflected that, Light said slowly. You're good enough at this that you could have turned it into a question about me in about one sentence. You've done it 4 times tonight already. Yes. Why didn't you? Elle considered this with what looked, in the dim battery light, like genuine effort, not performance effort. The kind Light had learned to spot in himself in mirrors, but the plainer kind. A man actually turning a question over, because he didn't already have the answer prepared, because it's the middle of the night, there is no work to distract either of us, and I find that I am tired in a way that makes maintaining every wall simultaneously more difficult than usual, Elle said. It's also possible I said it, because some part of me believes that if I show you something real, you might, eventually, be unable to resist showing me something real in return. Whether that's an honest impulse or simply a more patient version of the same interrogation technique. I confess I'm not entirely certain. I've been awake for 31 hours, Light-kun. My judgment of my own motives is not currently reliable. That's either the most honest thing you've said to me, Light said, or the single best move you've made all night? Yes, Elle agreed. I've been sitting here trying to work out which, and I find I don't actually know. I don't love that I don't know. It isn't a common experience, not knowing my own strategy. A ghost of something that might have been rueful humor crossed his face. gone before it could be confirmed. You'll have to forgive me if that's unsatisfying. I'd tell you which it was if I could. I rather think you'd do the same for me. And I rather think neither of us would be lying. Exactly. And I rather think that's the whole problem with this entire investigation in a single sentence. Light laughed. Actually laughed. A short, surprised huff of breath that was, he realized, half a second too late. Entirely unrehearsed. And then didn't try very hard to take it back. They didn't speak for a while after that. The lamp dimmed further down to something closer to candlelight, and the rain outside had eased from a hammering to a steadier, gentler fall, the storm working its way past them toward the mountains. At some point, Light was never quite sure when, exactly, the decision was made. Elle produced a half-crushed box of Pocky from his jacket and, without comment, set it on the table equidistant between them, which was, from Elle, either an olive branch or a variable Light hadn't accounted for, and possibly both. Light took one. It felt, absurdly, like the most honest exchange of the entire night. For what it's worth, Light said eventually, into the dark, if you're wrong about me, when this is over, whenever it's over, I don't think I'll hate you for tonight. The rest of it maybe. Not tonight. That's generous of you. It's not generosity. I just don't think you could have helped it, being what you are. Light turned the Pocky stick between two fingers, not eating it, just needing something to occupy his hands. I think you'd have done exactly this to anyone smart enough to be worth doing it to. I don't think it's personal. I think that's almost the saddest thing about you, Ryuzuki. It would be so much simpler if it were personal. And if you're Kira, Elle said, when this is over, will you hate me, then? I don't know, Light said, and had the strange, vertiginous experience of not being entirely sure himself, whether that was true. Ask me when we're not in the dark. I think the dark is doing something to both of our answers tonight. That, Elle said, may be the most accurate thing either of us has said all night. The lights came back at 2:47 in the morning. Light noted the time, out of old habit, the number registering somewhere behind his eyes before the rest of him caught up, with no warning at all. Monitors blinking awake, the desk lamp flooding the room in ordinary yellow light that felt, after so many hours of gray, almost violent. Somewhere below, machinery hummed back to life floor by floor. A building exhaling. Elle blinked against it like something startled out of water. And in that half second, before the analytical stillness reasserted itself, before the eyes went flat and assessing again, Light thought he saw something that might have been reluctance, or might not have been. It was gone too fast to be sure. Folded back under the ordinary architecture of Elle's face, and by the time Elle reached for the nearest laptop, thumb already moving to wake the screen, there was no trace of the hours between at all. The server should be back within a few minutes, Elle said, in precisely the voice he used for case updates, as though he were reading it off a card. I'd like to resume the Higuchi financials as soon as they're accessible, of course, Light said, and heard his own voice slide, just as smoothly, back into its usual register, pleasant, competent, faintly amused, a young man glad to be useful. He stood, straightened his shirt, and by the time he sat back down at his own station the last of the dark had gone out of his face as completely as it had gone out of the room. Neither of them mentioned the Pocky box, still sitting empty on the low table, between the two chairs. Neither of them mentioned the mother, or the worrying, or the 31 hours, or the laugh that hadn't been planned. It sat there in the room with them, unspoken, the way certain things do after a blackout, present in the furniture, in the angle of two chairs that had, at some point in the dark, ended up closer together than either of them would have arranged them on purpose, in the particular quality of the silence that followed, which was not quite the silence that had before the storm. Later, much later, going over the night in the careful, private accounting he kept of every conversation with Elle, Light would not be able to say with any confidence which of them had come out ahead. He had learned things. He had, unforgivably, shown things, if only for a second at a time. So, he thought, had Elle. Though whether that showing had been a lapse or a calculation dressed up as one, he genuinely could not say, and the not knowing sat in him uneasily, like a held breath he couldn't quite release. Across the room, without looking up from the monitor now glowing steadily back to life, Elle reached for a fresh box of Pocky from his bag, and did not offer Light any this time. Neither of them said anything about that either.